and welcome to another episode of Fast Forward, a podcast from QSR Magazine where we talk to the founders, innovators, and entrepreneurs behind some of the world's most exciting fast casual restaurant concepts. My name is Sam Oches. I'm the editor of QSR and the editorial director of Food News Media. On today's episode, I'm sharing my conversation with Charles Bililies, the founder and CEO of Souvla, a fine, fast Greek concept based out in San Francisco. Now, I first started hearing about Souvla a couple of years ago. This is a restaurant that started in 2014 in San Francisco, and it was probably sometime around 2016. I started hearing murmurs in the industry about this incredible Greek concept. You just got to try it next time you're in town. People are just raving about this restaurant. So what's so great about it? Well, I did get a chance to sit down and have lunch at Souvla for the first time before my conversation with Charles. And I got to tell you, it's incredibly delicious, incredibly fresh food. It's authentic, but they offer their own spin on it. So when you get a sandwich at Souvla, it comes with French fries on it. Is that different? Yes. Is it authentic? No, not really. Is it delicious? Yes, it is very, very delicious. But also, Souvla does bring in a lot of authenticity into the concept. It's the only restaurant in America with an all-Greek beverage menu. It has all Greek wines, Greek beer. It has Greek frozen yogurt for dessert. This is just a really exciting and advanced menu, I think, for the fast casual world. It also has just really wonderful hospitality and really thoughtful branding, I think, too. So I was so excited to sit down and finally have my first Souvla meal, but also to talk to Charles. He has this incredible pedigree. He went to culinary school, then he went to hospitality school at Cornell, spent a long time in the fine dining world working for renowned chefs like Thomas Keller and Michael Mina, and then one day he got this great idea for a fast casual Greek concept and really stewed over it for a couple of years before he opened the first Souvla in 2014. It's now grown to 4 locations across San Francisco, just celebrated its 5th anniversary, and I took that opportunity to sit down with Charles in his office in the Hayes Valley neighborhood of San Francisco, just a couple of blocks away from the first location for Souvla, and he started by telling me a little bit more about how growing up in a Greek family, why that really kind of led him down this path toward food service and then eventually to Souvla.
So I am fortunate, I suppose that a lot of this was kind of in my blood. And really when you think about sort of both my parents being Greek, my mother coming to the U.S. When she was in high school from Athens. My father's father was a chef and a restaurateur. My parents, entrepreneurs, small business owners, not in the restaurant space. So a lot of this is kind of, I joke, is being hereditary a little bit.
Yeah.
So you combine that with just being in a Greek family, which, like so many, food is very much the sort of central subject. And even when you take it a step back, and this is a true story, my first words as a human was actually ordering lunch. So
how appropriate.
Yeah, and so there was a brief time after graduating high school where I was exploring non-food, non-restaurant things, and that took about a half of a year at college before I came back and realized that cooking was what I loved to do, and food and restaurants was really kind of where I was happiest and what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So the Souvla. So I in coming up. Out of college, I went to, and we chatted a little bit before, but I am probably one of the few people in this business that actually went to school for this stuff. I think
That's right.
I think so many in the restaurant business sort of stumble upon it, or aspiring to other things and just kind of get sucked into the restaurant world and just never leave.
Yeah.
I've had the good fortune to go to both culinary school and to a proper sort of kind of hospitality school as well, and spend the first 10 years out of school, or certainly in school as well, working for some of the best brands and best chefs in the country.
Yeah. Thomas Keller being one of them.
Yeah. That was I graduated Cornell in 2006, and moved across country to take a job as his very first culinary assistant. And so that was pretty amazing, and was just brought about an interesting kind of blend of my culinary background, because up until that point I was cooking, whether restaurants like Legal Seafoods. I was at the Ritz-Carlton for a little while. Spent some time in the fine dining world down south, and so had gotten pretty fluent on what it meant to either be a line cook or a sous chef or things like that. Went back to school, had a bit of a business degree, business education at that point, and so that role, very much right place, right time, bringing together the education as far as how to use Microsoft Excel or things like that, but then also understanding intimately how kitchens operate.
Right.
Yeah.
And Thomas Keller, this is a titan of the chef world. This is a guy that has several incredible restaurants, James Beard, et cetera, et cetera. What do you learn from somebody like that?
So the two biggest takeaways from my time with Thomas was, so I was in a as I mentioned, a very unique role. I was his culinary assistant, so that meant that I wore a lot of hats and got to do a lot of things, and there was and got to define the role. It didn't exist before.
Yeah.
And that's a role that still exists, to my knowledge, within the organization. So that's maybe a little bit of my sort of legacy there, but it got to span a number of different disciplines, and so it was everything from managing all of the stagiaires and the externs, to typing up the menus every day, to we would travel together and do cooking demonstrations.
Oh wow.
So the biggest thing from my end, as far as working directly with him, is that I had to, in pretty short order, learn to anticipate all of his questions and all of his needs. So I had to learn how to think like Thomas Keller.
Wow.
Yeah, which is no small feat. But there would be this expectation, because he's working on so many things, and is so detail oriented. He would walk in to the office or whatever, and he would ask a question, and he would already be a couple steps ahead in sort of the conversation. So it wouldn't even be about, hey, I want to talk to you about this. It would be it would be 4 questions in of what that intro would have been.
Right.
And so you already had to just know that answer, and sort of know, based on the first couple of words of the question, what subject we're talking about right now. So, and also just to be able to, certainly within the standards of execution and things like cleanliness and all that stuff, you learn to become that detail oriented and just catch all of the things, and really just see the things that he was seeing, and that that quality manifested itself in Souvla, certainly in the very early days, and has continued to play out in over the last 5 years, where I trained the original team sort of subconsciously, and certainly the original management team, once I started to sort of take a step back, of how to see the things that I saw, how to catch the things, how to notice the little details that were there, and that they would start to anticipate. So if I saw, I could look across the room and see a table that needed to be bussed, and someone was already on their way to go bus it.
Okay.
That there was, there was, a little French fry that was, stuck under the table over in the corner that I noticed, and someone was over there picking it up. And that kind of parlays into the second part of that I very much try to instill with all of our managers is to, treat the restaurant and treat the operation as if it was your own. Mm-hmm. And there's a fairly well-known sort of excerpt from one of the books that was written about Thomas, about noticing, walking in front of the French Laundry and seeing a cigarette butt on the ground. And it's like, well, is that important to pick it up? Well, if the person's like, well, it's not my cigarette butt, it's not my restaurant, I don't really care, then it's like, maybe this isn't the right place for you to be. If this was your restaurant, would you pick up that cigarette butt and make sure that it's discarded? Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So we try to sort of instill that in our management teams, and that goes all the way through. We operate with great transparency internally with respect to our financials, and really empowering our management team to operate the restaurants as if it were their own, and to be in tune with how our restaurants function as a business.
Yeah.
So, but we got off topic from the origin story, I guess.
Well, no, I mean, that plays a huge part in the origin story, I'm sure, because then at some point I imagine you must have just been inspired to start your own thing. I mean, you learned from a master. Did you then want to be able to go and kind of become your own master to some degree?
No, yes and no. Because if you had asked me, when I was living up in Napa and in my probably early 20s, if I would be one day running this sort of group of fast fine Greek restaurants, I would have probably laughed. I was so embedded in the fine dining world. I mean, the first, the year that I started was the year that I think it was the year that Michelin came out. So it was like we just got 3 stars. It was just like that. So it was like it was such a to be in that environment and operating at that level was truly extraordinary. And certainly at that point I was pretty hardcore fine dining. It took a number of years for me to sort of back away from it, after sort of learning more and more about the inner workings and really getting a little bit more comfortable with eating, I think how most people will eat and just, really sort of simplifying a lot of things and not getting sort of caught up in all of the pomp and circumstance and accolades and all of those things.
Sure. So what was the point then for you that Souvla became, kind of this idea that became this business?
It was always, going back to the opening statement about being, brought up with parents who were entrepreneurs and small business owners. I think there was always the desire to do my own thing, but I was pretty adamant for the longest time of I want to go out and work for the best possible people and learn absolutely everything that I possibly can, and also cover all of the disciplines within the restaurant space, and then go do my own thing. Yeah. So for the longest time, while I was, whether it was with Thomas or with Michael Mina, people would always ask, when are you going to open your own thing? And it was always just like, that will happen at some point, but there's still a lot that has to kind of come together. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to, check all the boxes and get, the operational sort of foundation in working in kitchens and cooking and just food, and then working in dining rooms and just understanding, service and wine and just like the day-to-day operations of, operating a, full service restaurant and managing teams. But then also understanding, the back end stuff, financials, HR, development, all of those things. All of that is incredibly important, and all of that has to come together,
right?
In order for someone to do their own thing,
right.
Well, at least. I mean, I think I always make, because I do a lot of advising for the sort of next generation, and I always make a big point to say that the first thing that needs to happen is for someone to write a business plan, because you have to understand the restaurant as a business. You can be the most talented chef in the world. You could be the greatest sommelier this planet has ever seen, but if you don't understand how a restaurant functions as a business, then you're just great at throwing dinner parties,
right?
So the idea for Souvla actually didn't come around until 2010, early 2010, and it was kind of it really. That light bulb moment sort of splits almost immediately into sort of two sort of paths, two ways of thinking. One of which centered around the product, and one of which centered around the business model.
Okay.
And so the light bulb happened in sort of spring 2010. I was living in San Francisco, but at with a roommate, and we had this apartment that had a big backyard, which is rare for this city.
Yeah. And
we both worked in restaurants, and we were like we had this apartment, and it was like we got to throw some sort of a party or something here. And for those sort of non-Greeks, the tradition of roasting a whole lamb at every Easter, and we just did this on Sunday because it was Greek Easter, is like is a super important tradition. It was something that was a part of my life growing up. And just just a point of pride being a Greek American, and so it just so happened that when we were trying to think about this, was Easter was coming up, and so we decided to have this kind of non sort of Greek Easter party, but we would roast a whole lamb, and we wanted to do, we set about of inviting friends, and with two criteria, is that we would invite people and they had to do two things. One, they had to bring something. We were going to provide the lamb,
okay,
but they had to bring some sort of side or something to eat, and or something to drink, and they had to bring someone who we didn't know.
Ah, smart.
And we ended up doing, I think, 3 or 4 of these parties over the course of a year, because I could order in a whole animal from the restaurant that I was working at the time, and so you're paying wholesale and all that fun stuff. And we had an actual rotisserie in our backyard that I bought. And so we had this. The first time we did it was with the lamb, and so the following day we had this amazing party, and the following day we were cleaning up. And I was, getting everything together, and I was a little hungry because it was lunch-ish. And I started to kind of put together this sort of leftover sandwich. We had some meat left over from the lamb. Someone had brought this beautiful heirloom tomato salad. There just so happened to be some pita bread there and some tzatziki and whatever. And so I made myself this leftover sandwich.
Yeah.
That was like with the whole roasted, chopped up lamb meat. And the light bulb went off, and I was like, holy crap! I was like, this is amazing. Why can't I find this anywhere? Why can't I buy this, locally?
Yeah.
And so the wheel started turning on the product side, and started quickly sort of going down the path of like, okay, well, this is effectively, the sort of stereotypical sort of gyro sandwich, just sort of stripped back down and sort of rebuilt up with a higher quality of product. And so I was thinking about the history, because the gyro kind of came to the U.S. in the 70s and had sort of been kind of gone the way of the hot dog, where it was this kind of like mass-produced sort of mystery cone meat that was generally of questionable quality, served as oftentimes like a late-night cheap kind of drunk food with out of season tomatoes, and just and it was this kind of thing where you would usually be a little drunk, and you would kind of alternate bites of like, this is delicious, I think I'm going to be sick, and
right.
and the product, the sandwich, in principle, when you think about it, its architecture, this warm, thick, fluffy pita, the Greek style pita, this sort of cooling yogurt, the sort of lemony, garlicky meat, and then just like vibrant, fresh produce and little cheese and stuff like that, is just an amazing combination of flavors. And so 2010, we're kind of right in the middle of everything else was getting the sort of chef treatment, right?
Oh, yeah.
The burger, the hot dog, the taco, everything was kind of being reimagined now under all of these chefs, and no one had really touched the gyro or souvlaki sandwich. So I saw a huge opportunity there.
Yeah.
And but then really rethinking the architecture, but also just moving away from the mystery cone meat. And so the original idea for Souvla is that we were actually going to roast whole lambs every day.
Oh.
And that's kind of a funny story in and of itself. The first time that we tried to do that,
but
the other sort of path along the same time was I was still pretty deep in the fine dining world, but at this point. I was working for Michael Mina, and I was working. He had opened up a Burgundian-themed wine bar, sauce restaurant downtown in the Millennium Tower called RN74, and at that point, I was the assistant general manager of that restaurant. Writing, and I was doing a lot of the sort of business work for it. I was writing the restaurant budgets and doing P&L reviews with the partners and all the weekly financial reporting. So I was getting my sort of unofficial kind of master's, if you will, in like restaurant financials, just by getting my hands dirty and thankfully being allowed to get my hands dirty, doing stuff like that. And working through all that stuff, you start to see just the incredible level of expense that goes into operating these fine dining restaurants. So I was having sort of two conversations with myself at this point, being like, okay, let's think about this product, and let's think about how we can kind of reimagine the gyro or souvlaki sandwich, and then like let's think about how kind of broken fine dining is and just how flawed it is as a business model, and how can I take my experience in the fine dining world, understanding sort of at the highest level the service standards and touch points and detail that goes into operating these restaurants and creating these amazing dining experiences. How can I, and now understanding more of the business side of it, how can I distill a lot of that down?
Yeah.
And find a way to sort of bring these two things together. And that's how sort of Souvla got started. And so that took the better part of 4 years from sort of inception to opening, in terms of writing and rewriting a business plan a couple times, going out to raise capital, and that was certainly a struggle for me in the early days, because the product was sort of inherently familiar, but also entirely new.
Right.
The business model and the sort of people were having a hard time understanding it, because fast casual was exploding at the time, and they just kind of immediately assumed that it was going to be a more conventional fast casual restaurant. I was trying to explain the nuance, sort of the vision as far as how it wasn't.
They thought it would be Greek Chipotle.
They thought it would be Greek Chipotle.
Yeah.
They thought it would be Greek Chipotle, and I had to kind of be fairly diplomatic and be like, well, sort of, but not really, and so there was that, and also I was unproven as an operator. I had a pedigree, but I hadn't done this before, So it took certainly me stepping away from my full-time role with Michael Mina in the middle of 2011. I actually sort of decamped to Greece. I needed like a very convenient excuse, because it had reached a point where this was kind of this like little side project, and I still had my full-time job, and it had sort of risen to a point where it's like, okay, now I want to focus on this, but I couldn't really be forthright and say, hey, I'm working on this thing. So I use travel as a way to sort of step away from my role in that restaurant group, because admittedly I'd spent at that point, 5-6 years working straight without really much of a vacation or being able to travel. So I booked a one-way ticket to Greece. I mean, I really kind of went for it and packed a light bag, and didn't have a huge agenda. I just wanted, I had this business plan, and I wanted to be able to go not only to sort of re-energize and sort of reframe my mind, kind of getting out of that fine dining world, but also reaffirm kind of what I was looking to do, and also to start to gain a little bit more inspiration as far as connecting with my sort of cultural heritage, but and just see how it's done over there as well, and start to kind of build relationships.
Right.
So I came back at the start of 2012, and that's when I kind of went full public with my ambitions and desires, and it took 2.5 years to find a space and raise the money. It was a pretty small, scrappy raise, but yeah, and we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary a couple weeks ago.
That's awesome. And I want to get into that first restaurant opening, but I'm curious. You said something about the brokenness of fine dining. I'm curious what you think. What was that? What was broken about fine dining, and then how were you trying to fix that with Souvla?
Yeah, I mean, I think to clarify, I don't know if it's necessarily broken. I think flawed is probably a better way of putting it, and certainly just as a business model.
Yeah.
I think that there will all people talk, especially as of late, about the death of the sort of the mid-tier full service restaurant, and I sort of share those concerns. I think that there will always be a place for fine dining. I think that it's just from a creative standpoint, from a if you want to think about it in the same way that fine art or fine music or things like that are viewed and appreciated. I think that fine dining there will always be a place for it.
Yeah.
It's flawed in that so much goes into it, and it's not a particularly profitable enterprise.
Yeah.
And that's more or less across the board. The amount of and obviously as an average check or general expense, it's quite considerable, but the amount of time and labor and just all of the things that go into it, you're not it has to truly be kind of a passion project, or something where there's you have some sort of a benefactor that's there to sort of support the venture.
Yeah.
Because generally on its own, even when you're charging $200, $300, $400 a head, oftentimes that the numbers don't really work out in the way that they maybe should.
Right, yeah.
So
you have this incredible pedigree. You had spent something like 15 years in the industry prior to opening Souvla. And, obviously somebody with that kind of pedigree, you would think, okay, then you're going to go open a restaurant concept. It's going to be immediately successful. Was that the case? I mean, all that time you spent marinating sort of the Souvla idea.
Yeah.
Did it pay off when you first opened the doors?
I think so. I mean, there was a true clarity of vision that I had held on to for the 4 years from idea to opening, and sort of resisted and succeeded as far as trying to have other people tell me what they think that I should do or what they think that it should have been, and that could have been. A lot of it were people that were lining up that wanted to give me a lot of money, and like, well, you should do this, and it's like, this is not what I want to do. This is not what this is supposed to be. It's like, I appreciate the sort of support, but it's like, if you want to invest, this is what we're doing. I really stuck to my guns, and there was a bit of a risk in that because we only really did a couple of sort of investor previews as far as testing the menu and the ingredients and all of those things. It wasn't something that we did like a big pop-up series or any of those things. I think we only really did two and a half, call it, like little preview events.
Okay.
So there was and at one point my now wife was she was kind of like, you want to maybe like test this out a little bit more, make sure that people really like this? I was like, no, it's like, trust me, they're going to like this.
Yeah.
And again, was in hindsight, obviously, a huge risk. There was a fairly profound moment the day that we opened the doors in the morning where it was like, okay, this is the first time that we're going to people are going to come in. And I was like, wow, people are going to come in and give me money in exchange for this sandwich or this salad that I've been dreaming about and talking about nonstop, for the last, 4 or 5 years.
Surreal.
It's super surreal.
Yeah.
And opening day, people kind of started to trickle in. It wasn't like this like hotly anticipated people were lining up on opening day thing. It definitely started, pretty organically, but it's something that started to pick up steam, and that by the time we were, in our second month, we kind of knew that we were onto something.
Yeah.
Tony, who is our chef and also my partner in the business, he started really on kind of a consultancy type basis. He for 7-8 years was the chef de cuisine at Kokari, which is sort of the sort of preeminent Greek restaurant, more high end here in San Francisco. And even though I had sort of created the menu and the recipes, I knew that I couldn't operate the business, the front of house, and the kitchen all by myself. I was
sure.
I knew that I needed that assistance, and so he kind of came in on sort of a consultancy role, and with the hope, I was like, listen, I can't bring you on with a salary and that stuff, because on paper right now it's like we don't, this is only going to sort of work with just me as the only manager, but the hope would be that this can kind of grow and that you can come on, and so I was just so grateful to be in a position that within a couple of months we were able to have that conversation, and by the fall he was able to come on full time, and
that's great.
And so and here we are 5 years later, having built just what I think is a really, really incredible company.
So the idea of what you're serving on the menu, the branding of Souvla is all around this Greek experience, but it's, I mean, admittedly, you say it's not even that authentic. You pull in some of the authenticity, but you do your own thing too.
Sure.
What are you trying to accomplish with that, both in the menu and the branding?
Yeah. So I always joke in that Souvla is a direct reflection of sort of my own complicated relationship with my cultural heritage, right? So I'm American born to Greek parents, growing up with all of the sort of customs and traditions of your average sort of Greek family, but also as part of a generation where, as you know, being born to immigrant parents, where there was this high importance on just having us be normal American kids.
Yeah.
And so I didn't, I understand Greek and I can speak a little bit of it, but I'm not fluent in the language, and that can be sometimes challenging when you're talking with someone who's from Greece or grew up speaking the language and sort of other things like that. But more importantly, Souvla was not really created directly for the Greek community. I wanted this to be very approachable to everyone. Yeah. So you didn't need to be Greek to come to Souvla and understand the food, to understand the ingredient that's on the menu, to understand or to know how to pronounce agioritiko, which is the varietal of grape in our red wine. That's why we purposely have the wine list listed as Greek white, Greek red, Greek rosé, things like that. So it's super approachable. 99% of our clientele is not Greek.
Right. Yeah.
And also you won't see anywhere, certainly not in the restaurant, on the menu, or on anything that's written about us, you won't see the words traditional or authentic. Mm-hmm. You see words like inspired, which that's very much the case. What's interesting is that I was able to take and sort of exercise a lot of creative freedom in creating the brand and creating the menu, and it really runs the gamut because we're here in Northern California. We have access to just tremendous product. We wanted to be able to leverage that. And so you'll see things like our chicken salad, which is our number one selling item now at Souvla, sort of ironically because it was conceived as a sandwich shop. But it's got fennel and it's got navel oranges and it's got things like that. And is that super traditional to Greek cuisine? No. Is it delicious? Absolutely. Mm. But then on the flip side, we have we make a very traditional egg lemon soup called avgo lemono, which I've been pulled aside countless times by Greeks that said this is better than my yayas, better than my grandmother's.
Wow.
We also have the country's only all Greek beverage list, all the way down to the sparkling water. So we bring in all of our beverages from Greece. We have a line of private label Greek wines. So we work with 3 different wineries to produce 4 different wines under the Souvla label. We have a Souvla beer. And the pork sandwich that you had for lunch today mm-hmm. is our sort of homage to the sort of classic, Athenian sort of souvlaki gyro with the tomatoes and the cucumbers and the feta cheese and the mint yogurt and things like that. So we wanted to listen. I could have developed and created a very traditional, authentic Greek restaurant that could have catered to Greeks and done all the things. There's not enough Greek people in the Bay Area that would have supported it. It's just just the reality. It's like, so this was designed to be with the intent of being a successful enterprise, and so you have to kind of know the audience and sort of expand beyond just that little like cultural group that is the sort of Greek American.
Let's talk about that, because you seem to have great confidence when you opened that this was going to work. What gave you that confidence? Certainly trends at the time, but also your demographic. I mean, did you just get a sense this is what people wanted?
I had great confidence that it was going to work in its original sort of state, which is not the state that it's in today.
Okay.
I mean, this is, that was a restaurant that the original that you saw earlier today was it's 1,000 square feet. It's got mm-hmm. 42 seats. I opened and closed that restaurant every day for the first year. The concept was intended to be scalable, but that restaurant wasn't designed to do the volume that it now does. And also, I don't think that it was really that we thought it was going to be able to be in a position that we could start to grow, I think, as early on. Mm-hmm. That restaurant is probably doing, easily 6 times the volume that, it theoretically was on paper, could or should have done.
Crazy.
Probably a little bit more.
It's all those Lyft rides.
Yeah. Well, and listen, delivery wasn't part of the landscape in San Francisco in 2014 either.
Yeah.
It was not in the original business plan or any of those things. We also got just incredibly lucky with the opening team. I mean, the people that came on, and it was really just incredible at the start of the month to to reflect back, because opening day for us was April 8th, and this is April 30th. So a couple weeks ago to really, reflect back on, what life was like, 5 years ago, and also to look at, a solid quarter of the opening team of that restaurant is still with us today.
Wow.
The guy who served you your food today was part of the opening team.
That's awesome.
And a lot of them are now have now risen up and are in management roles. We have we found so much success from promoting from within. Two of the women that run basically all of the restaurant operations for us on a daily basis started in that restaurant that you saw today.
Wow.
as a counter server, taking people's orders.
That's great.
And now they're on our leadership team. So I think that the confidence sort of came from, I think, my clarity of vision and being really, really fortunate early on to have people that bought into that vision and saw that passion and wanted to be a part of something special.
Sure.
And it wasn't just one of those things where it was like, this is going to be great, everyone's loving it, and I'm going to just walk away.
Right.
There's not a day that I'm not in any one of our restaurants. There's not a day that I'm not thinking almost exclusively about Souvla. This is like, and sometimes that can be a challenge, because there's literally like 6 other concepts that I really want to do that just continue to just, my wife and I literally for fun will like concept out restaurants, and it just like, we'll think about where it goes and what it looks like and what the menu is and all those things. But it's like, the biggest challenge is having the discipline to just continue to focus on Souvla, because there's as I was saying before, there's a tremendous amount of nuance that goes into what we do on a daily basis, and also it just it's super important for me to sort of continue to broadcast and share that vision with our team and continue to sort of mentor and guide and develop them.
Right. Let's talk about the business model piece of this, because that obviously was such a big part of what you developed. Mm-hmm. And of course, all of the 2010 to 2014 period that you're really, developing this concept, that was really the height of fast casual. I mean, you think about it. Totally. I mean, 2015 arguably was maybe the peak, right before Chipotle's issues. Mm-hmm. And, at this point, you did see a lot of companies coming out that were Chipotle of this or that. Mm-hmm. Everybody really kind of clinging on to the customization model. Sure. How much did that or didn't that influence you in developing the Souvla model?
I think that it influenced me quite a bit, just in terms of like seeing, not only seeing the model and seeing the sort of mass popularity behind it, but I saw that as sort of the foundation, and that I felt that I had sort of a unique background and skill set where I could take that and I could refine it. Mm-hmm. So I think you could easily, you could think of Souvla, and whether you call it fast, fine casual, what have you, you could either look at it as it being an elevated version of fast casual, or you could see fast casual and you can see this sort of whittled down and just like a more refined version of it. And I think that oftentimes the fast casual brands are being approached by or operated by or grown by people that don't necessarily have the fine dining pedigree that I had, and so there's just a different skill set and a different understanding and a different level of sort of experience that can be applied to that. Sure. Yeah. If I had some sort of a crazy marketing background or something like that, Souvla would probably be something different than what it is today. Right. So I think that so much of it is actually just about utilizing that as the as sort of the base, and then just sort of applying it in sort of a different way. The game is basically the same. Right. It just being played, at you could argue at a higher level, certainly at a different level. Yeah. So.
Well, and being in San Francisco, I imagine that changes it too. I mean, you have sort of this higher, let's call it a higher standard of quality. Sure. And much more dense population, much more diverse population. Yeah. All of these things, not to mention all of the tech companies in the whole world who have a presence here. I mean, as you were mentioning before, it's like you guys became the early adopters of all of these services that are now so present across the country. Sure. So did that affect like this high level of quality you have?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there were a couple of things that we had sort of going for us and potentially against us. But one, San Francisco has always been this sort of hub for innovation. I mean, so many great companies, whether they're food and beverage or tech or whatever, have kind of come out of this part of the country. You also just happen to have a general populace that is far more savvy with respect to food and beverage than almost anywhere else in the country, save for potentially New York, and even one could argue that it's more discerning here, just because there is such an incredible restaurant scene, so much access to a very high quality product, people that are considerably more thoughtful about what they are ordering, what they are eating, how it is being sourced, all those things. I sort of made the sort of comment as I was talking to people about creating Souvla, that it was the notion that we're local and organic and sustainable, like those are table stakes here. Mm-hmm. That's no longer any sort of differentiating factor. Like that is expected. Yeah. And we've always been really proud to showcase the different companies that we work for as far as where we're sourcing all of our proteins, and most of our vegetables and produce is organic, and we're sourcing most of our product pretty locally. Like I said, that's table stakes here. But then you also have the flip side of it, where San Francisco is an incredibly expensive city to live in. Yeah. It's an incredibly expensive city to do business in. 2014, I think probably maybe 2013 it was announced, but that by 2018, San Francisco was going to be at $15 an hour. So we knew that going into, and that obviously when that news kind of came out, and Seattle was right around the same time, there was pandemonium, certainly amongst restaurant operators, and made a lot of national headlines. So we knew what the landscape was going to be, mm-hmm. So then it was about, okay, well, this is where we're heading. How do we create a business model that's tailored to these unique sort of attributes? Expensive real estate, expensive labor, things like that. And so how do we whittle away some of the non-essentials so that this actually pencils out? Yeah. Also, just having the foresight. So I do all of the restaurant development, and when we opened. As I made mention earlier, it took us 2 years to find our first restaurant here in Hayes Valley. A year of that was just tied up in lease negotiation. But wow. And thankfully, I had the sort of patience and wherewithal to wait it out. And one of the reasons I was so adamant about this particular neighborhood is that back then there were about a half a dozen different sort of condo developments that ground hadn't even been broken, but the entitlement and permit process sort of situation here in San Francisco is so ridiculous. Yeah. That I knew that by the time all this was done, these and certainly by the time the lease was going to be signed, that these buildings would have either been built and open or on their way, and this was all market rate condo construction that was going to really change a neighborhood that had already undergone pretty significant change. So we were able to get in and probably secure the last kind of below market rate lease that existed in Hayes Valley, and now it's 5 years later and I don't say this because I live here and we have a restaurant. My wife has a restaurant here. It's the hottest, probably most desirable neighborhood, not only to live in but also to shop in and to dine in. Yeah. So part of that is just again having some of that foresight. Sure.
So you open the first restaurant. You build your awareness among the local customers. When does unit number 2 come? How long did it take you guys? I mean, it took so long to get unit number 1 open.
It took a long time for the first restaurant. It took it definitely took a solid kind of 6 months or so to really start to get a lot of the kinks kind of worked out, and the first restaurant is really the one that we made all of our mistakes in terms of like layout and things like that. There was so much that was in my head that was that vision. It's like, no, we're going to do it this way, and like they're going to order. The fun story was we originally put the point of sale directly in front of the rotisserie, and we designed these restaurants around the rotisserie. But I was like, no, this is great. We're going to put it right there, and I wanted that visual interaction of like you're ordering, you're seeing the meet's going on. This is super important for us to be transparent and bring about that show and all that stuff. And it turns out that standing in front of a rotisserie with your back to it, ringing people up, is a pretty uncomfortable thing to be doing for 6 hours a day. Not only that, but then the line went literally through the middle of the dining room. And so thankfully, we early on we kind of realized that, and we moved the point of sale up to the front of the restaurant, where you saw where we kind of thankfully kind of built out this little service bar.
Yeah.
Which did two things. One, it made for a more sort of comfortable working environment, and freed up the rest of the dining room. But two, and probably more importantly, and it was a happy accident, but we. It forced the line to go out the door.
Yeah.
And, for a new brand just establishing itself and being in a neighborhood where there's a lot of both local and sort of tourist traffic, you're walking around, you're shopping, this or whatever, all of a sudden you walk up and you see this place with a line out the door. And you're like, wow. Souvla, what is this? I don't know. I haven't heard of it. It's like, it's got a line out the door. It's got to be pretty good.
The best marketing you can do.
Yeah. And thankfully, like, smartphones had kind of got into popularity, and San Francisco has a reputation for better or for worse, of people who just love to stand in lines. And so that was super, super helppul as well. And so we, and right around then, I think late 2014, we got super fortunate. We were in Bon Appetit magazine. We were listed as the #1 food trend for 2015. So I think that was actually in the January issue of 2015. We got on the Today Show. We started to get some pretty meaningful national press as well,
right.
which was super great. But it really wasn't until we, as far as from going from 1 to 2, and I spend a lot of time now. People that open restaurants will reach out and sort of inquire about how we went from 1 to 2, and two stories there of one, we had just started to do delivery because we opened our second restaurant in June of 2016, so almost 2 years later, and that's kind of how long it takes, I think. Looking at the spot where it now is exactly a mile due west of the original restaurant, and it was up a hill, and it's in a very sort of up and coming neighborhood called NOPA, or north of the Panhandle. And what was happening on the sort of Divisadero Street corridor there, I saw a lot of parallel with what had been happening in Hayes Valley and Hayes Street, and obviously it's close, so if we need to run back and forth, there's a practical application, but also we were super concerned that it was too close to the first one. And so at that point we had started to do delivery. We were working with Caviar, and I reached out to the team at Caviar, and I had them produce a map that showed every single physical location that Souvla was delivered to for the entire time that we had been working together.
Oh, wow.
And so when you look at the map, you see pretty easily that the highest concentration of Souvla delivery was happening within 1 square mile of the restaurant, which is a testament to how lazy people are.
I was going to say.
But it gave me comfort in sort of reinforced the decision to open up a mile away. Mm-hmm. We were sort of just outside of our little kind of radius there, and what ended up happening there was we opened up 2 huge neighborhoods on the western part of the city, that now all of a sudden Souvla was not only just closer to them in general, but from a delivery standpoint, it became more affordable to have Souvla delivered. Mm-hmm. And so that restaurant now does just an extraordinary amount of delivery. Our growth, whether it was back then or to this day, really comes down to 2 things. It comes down to real estate, and it comes down to team. Mm-hmm. And you have to have both of those things in place. We were really, really fortunate by the time that we were ready to open up the second restaurant that we had built out, and we had really developed and trained internally, because these were all people that kind of started with us more in sort of line level roles, a management team that could stand alone and operate that restaurant. And then we would take the original, and it's this kind of funny just sort of breakdown where the woman who was the first manager of the original restaurant became the first GM, and then she basically kind of hired and trained her replacement, and then that woman became the GM of Hayes Valley, and then the woman who had sort of managed herself out of a job came and helped open up the second restaurant. So I had support. Tony and I had support operationally, and we brought in The second one was an interesting one because we had to bring in some talent from the outside, and that was kind of the first time that we had to look a little bit outside of that. Now we kind of do a little bit of both, but we also have a lot more restaurants. So we have a bigger bench, and we learned a lot from the difference between promoting from within and bringing pedigree talent from the outside, and you win some, you lose some, but actually our opening kitchen manager there, tremendous amount of high-end restaurant experience, opened up a bunch of restaurants, worked for a lot of great chefs, was the opening kitchen manager there, and he's now our culinary operations manager. So he oversees, along with Tony, all of the other restaurants. So I think that it's you have to, so much of it just comes down to having those two things,
right?
And not necessarily being so hell bent on, okay, I need to open up a second. Right. You have to kind of wait for things to kind of fall into place.
And opening one is a thing in itself. Going from 1 to 2 is a thing in itself, and then 2 and beyond sort of becomes a thing in itself as well. Exactly. So now that you have 4 locations open today,
correct.
So what have you learned? I mean, how much have you grown and evolved? You mentioned the lamb roasting earlier that didn't end up happening. But besides that, like, what has changed? What have you learned through this whole process?
Yeah. I mean, an awful lot. There's really not a day that goes by that I'm not learning something new, and I think that's super important. Mm-hmm. And I think that we have been incredibly fortunate to have found the level of success that we have had over these last 5 years that affords us the ability to continue to reinvest in the restaurants and reinvest in our teams, and not necessarily to have the same sort of level of kind of financial stress that perhaps some other restaurants have, so we can start to make some larger strategic investments, whether it's in software, whether it's in people, whether it's in all of those things. But really, what we do now, the menu hasn't changed in 5 years, mm-hmm. and that was not the original intent, but the thought was it was going to change quarterly. But we just happened to get super lucky where the opening menu just stuck and people loved it, and now we couldn't change it unless we wanted to deal with some sort of like a mutiny on our hands or something like that. But not a day goes by that we're not continuing to think and rethink and reevaluate how we do things and how we can do them more consistently, more efficiently, all of those things. So we're always looking at that. And again, it was super fortunate to be in a position where the restaurant continues to grow positively year over year. So part of it is also like, okay, how do we deal with the ever increasing volume in our restaurants? But the big learnings come down to clarity of vision for sure, and mm-hmm. just like making sure that everyone's on the same page, and that we're all aligned in this vision. Obviously, the vision sort of starts with me, but it's this is not necessarily about like me telling everybody what to do. This is like, here's where we're going, guys. This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it, and we're all together on mm-hmm. this. But also at the same time, being able to bring people with different skill sets and different backgrounds to the table, and that we get to talk about. We could talk about whether it's challenges or whether it's future opportunities, and we get to bring about different perspectives and all be aligned on whatever decision it is that we're making. There's 6 of us now on our sort of leadership team, and so we meet once a week and we talk about not only a lot of operational day-to-day sort of things, but we do larger conversations about policies and certainly each of the restaurant teams, and also just larger sort of development opportunities. So and we all have our different areas of focus, but we all get to come together and just talk about all of those things. So, but I think so much of it just goes back from a learning standpoint of the importance of creating and fostering just a really really positive, really productive work environment. Mm-hmm. You see up in the restaurants and everywhere our tagline, "Make it nice and be nice." Mm-hmm. That's that's been in place since day one. It's our sort of motto. It's our guiding philosophy. It's what we embody and we practice every day. And that's and I kid with them, but adapted from our good friends Will Gadar and Daniel Hume.
That's right.
As far as the make it nice part, which is important, and that's obviously that kind of harkens back to my fine dining background, where there was this constant pursuit of perfection, and everything needs to be, right, and we're going for 3 stars or whatever it is, all those things, and that's important. But what was more important is my adding of the second part to that, because this constant pursuit of perfection, at times, if manifested in the wrong way, becomes very harmful, becomes very toxic. And that is an unfortunate part of the fine dining world, of this, the fact that there's this constant pursuit of perfection, that your best is never good enough, and all of these things, do it again, obviously a lot of like yelling and screaming and berating and all that stuff that is not super productive,
right.
and can be not only very very hurtful and harmful, but it can change people for the worst. And I unfortunately was a byproduct of that, and it took me a while to sort of come back to find my center again. And so I wanted to create a company that didn't have that culture, and so it was very very important to me that was sort of broadcasted and spoken about, and constantly affirmed, and is so visible. And so I'm really happy and just super proud to have built something where we have an organization. We have 175 people now, and nobody raises their voice. Nobody yells at anybody. Nobody insults anybody. If there's an issue or a conflict, whatever, it's like it's addressed and it's spoken about in a professional manner. We treat everyone in the restaurant, whether it's a guest, whether it's a fellow employee, whether it's a delivery courier, whether it's a driver, dropping off the produce order, with the same level of respect. And we've also built a company where there's a pretty high importance placed on work-life balance. We have 5 managers in every restaurant, which sounds a little crazy when you think about the nature of the business, and they're relatively small, and they're counter service, and that's why do you need so many people? Yeah. Part of it is we do a substantial amount of volume, and we're open 7 days a week for 11 hours a day, and part of it is also just important because our managers work no more than 50 hours a week. They all have 2 days off, generally back to back, unless they prefer otherwise. Every Souvla employee has 2 weeks of paid vacation. They all have full medical health insurance. They all, if they want to, they can, enroll in our 401k program. They have, we've brought about an extraordinary level of benefit, and we sort of punch above our weight, given our relatively small size, and all for, creating, a really positive, really productive place to work, and sort of changing the narrative of what a counter service restaurant can be, where people are, or certainly our people are proud to work at Souvla and proud to do what they do, and it's not just a job. Yeah. And we're able to sort of play that out by pointing to so many people that have come up through the company that started in line level roles, and are now truly have a career at Souvla. This is not just a job where you sit in front of a computer and plug people's orders in and hand them a number. Right. It's like with the right attitude and work ethic and drive, I mean, you can rise up into a senior management role. So again, just getting back to your question about the learning, it's so much of it is really just about identifying and cultivating talent and investing in them. And if you take care of them, they're going to take care of you. I mean, you and I are sitting here, during a lunch hour, and we've been talking for however long we have, and I haven't had to, answer a phone or put out a fire or be interrupted for any of this, because we have such an amazing team of women and men that are running our restaurants right now.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Talking about sort of rethinking the paradigm of the counter service restaurant. You see all these restaurants out there. We've been talking about a lot of them that are, I think, let's call it growing for growth's sake, because let's face it, there's a demand for fast casual restaurants especially, and there's a lot of equity groups out there that are wanting to kind of find that next big concept.
Sure.
And that's great, but it's not really what you guys are doing, and I imagine all of these things you've been talking about, I mean, that requires a good bit of your control. It requires a good bit of a sort of slow and steady growth pace.
Yeah.
So how does all of this inform how you approach this idea of growth?
Sure. I mean, I've always come from it from the very beginning with this notion of thoughtful growth, and we don't open restaurants just to open restaurants. I think that you would probably agree, but restaurants, even the more casual ones like ours, restaurants don't scale like technology scales, like production or retail or anything else. It's not the same.
Right.
They're still very, very human-based businesses that require great leadership and great people to work in. And yeah, we over the years have had the fortune to meet with a lot of venture capital and private equity firms that have taken an interest in the brand, and I think to your point, see Souvla and certainly our sort of pioneering model is the next big thing, and want to get involved. I've always enjoyed taking those meetings because I sort of came up in operations, so the sort of financial sort of institutional capital world is not the world that I come from. So it's been an interesting learning process for me, just understanding the language and different structures and different approaches and all of the sort of terminology. So I've always looked at it as a little bit more of just like an educational opportunity for me. But we have no institutional capital behind us, and I very much intend to keep Souvla privately held and to continue to own and control as much of it as I possibly can, because I do think that we have something here that's super special, and I do think that it needs to scale in the right way.
Yeah.
We have to have the buy-in from our team to be able to do the things that we want to do and open the restaurants where we want to open them. And I just feel really, really fortunate to be in a position where I don't have any external pressure to grow. That we open restaurants when we're ready to open restaurants. We are super fortunate to have a lot of inbound inquiry. People want Souvla all over the place, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And hopefully we get there. But I think with the big trade-off with getting to sort of relish in the headline of so and so raises X amount of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars is along with all of that money comes maybe at times, and you could debate this, but comes with an unfair or sort of unrealistic pressure to grow. And not only to grow, but to grow quicker than maybe you should grow or need to grow. And I think that having that external pressure, just obviously, for me, I know it would put a lot of stress on me personally, but moving that quickly, things start to happen that may not be in the best interest of the brand or the company, right? You start to get, you're starting to grow a team super fast, and so maybe you're making some hiring choices that may not have been the right ones because you didn't have the time to sort of vet, all that out. From a real estate standpoint, maybe you're opening up in, neighborhoods or parts of neighborhoods or cities that maybe you shouldn't be, opening in.
Yeah.
That hiring, even certainly at the line level, can get challenging if you're opening a restaurant a month or a restaurant. I mean, some of these brands are opening a restaurant a week. I mean, I don't know how they do it.
It's crazy. Yeah.
I feel we've done basically one restaurant a year, and that feels pretty good to us right now. Maybe that will go up over time, but we'll see. But just having the pressures of some sort of a firm that has a sizable financial stake that's saying you need to do this, and or having to answer to a board of directors or something like that. Listen, there are a lot of people that love that, and I think that, and there are a lot of brands that have found success in going that way. So I'm not trying to knock it. I just know what I want for Souvla and what I want for our brand and what the vision is, and I know that that's just not the way that we want to go about doing it.
Right.
So we're super fortunate to be in a position where we've got 4 restaurants that are all very profitable and can stand on their own, and to have a both a local and national, very sort of loyal, almost kind of tribe of people that are just really, really love what we do and love the brand. And I think just recognizing the fact that we have something really special here and that we don't want to screw it up. So we take all of these opportunities and we vet them, pretty seriously. I mean, I made mention earlier to you about, our sort of desire to open up in New York, which is obviously like a pretty significant move for us. I mean, that's me moving to New York,
right,
to do that.
Yeah.
That's not just like, okay, I'll sign a lease and like we'll send some people out. Like that's a pretty, personal thing. And I think that's the only way to really do it the right way.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Last question for you, Charles. If you were to look back at before you started this Souvla journey, but when you first got that idea, knowing what you know today, what would your advice be to that version of Charles? What would your advice be to young entrepreneurs who want to get in this game?
I think it's two things. One of which I already sort of alluded to of the notion of never underestimate the importance of writing a business plan. And I say that with sort of a hint of irony, because if you were to dust off the original Souvla business plan, it's nothing like what the restaurant is today. But it's an incredibly important exercise that helps you continue to sort of refine the vision and refine the business, and just get you better and better about talking to strangers, asking them for money, to invest in your business, because you have to, so much of my learnings in the early stages of trying to raise capital was, that was a world that I didn't truly know and understand. And, I knew restaurant operations pretty well. I knew food, and cooking pretty well, but like structuring a deal, talking to, investors about, what the IRR percentages of their investment is going to be, like, that's all stuff that I had to really educate myself and really get good at. The actual day-to-day operation stuff didn't really come together until the very end, because that was what I had known.
Yeah.
So I think that is definitely, the most, the people that reach out, hey, I have this idea, I'm all for paying it forward, because I did the exact same thing when I was at that stage. I reached out to people that I, former colleagues that had gone on to open up their own things, or people that I had heard about or read about. And, the very first time I did that, I was asked, if I had a business plan. I was like, well, not really. It was just like, stop. It was just like, write a business plan and then come back, and after the first couple of times, sort of when I started to do this a little bit more frequently a couple years ago, I would take the time, and then I realized, after halfway through I'm listening to someone talk about their thing, and then I would ask, and then it's like, no, and it's like, okay, well, now you've just kind of wasted, everyone's time here. So moving forward, really, whenever I get that inbound, it's I'm happy, do you have a business plan? If the answer is no, go and write a business plan. And the moment you have a business plan, send it my way, and like I'll be happy to take the time. I will read it. I will give feedback. I'll ask questions. I will do all that stuff. It's just such an important exercise to go through.
Yeah.
And it seemed crazy at the time, but just to wait so long. But never underestimate the importance of real estate. I made mention that that Hayes Valley spot was. It was a very challenging sort of situation, just in its backstory, and it took 2 years from when I sort of saw it, and like there was an opportunity to taking possession, and man, I'm so grateful that I really stuck to my guns and had the patience to wait that out, because I do think that if we opened even around the corner from where we are, I don't think that Souvla would have been as successful.
Interesting.
The biggest thing, and this was good advice, and it's certainly advice that I sort of continue to sort of look back on today, as we're sort of, as I've been now 2 years scouting real estate in New York.
Wow.
I kid you not, I'm like 80 spaces in, but you want to find the best possible real estate that you can for, certainly for your brand, and in this case, Souvla, more or less needs to be our sort of internal kind of development mantra is we want to be on iconic streets of iconic neighborhoods in iconic cities. So like that's our sort of guiding light from a development standpoint.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at a market like New York, you want to secure the best possible real estate that you can for that resonates for the brand, because if you find something that's not quite right, and you go and you do it and you open it up and it doesn't do well, was it the brand? Was it the market not identifying with the brand, or was it the real estate?
Great point.
And you won't know. And that was super salient advice that I got very early on from another restaurant operator here in the city, because I had keys on a spot over in sort of the Mission District, and it was like kind of an up and coming neighborhood, and it was like the rent was super cheap, and like we could have made something really cool there. And it was like, and I kept on trying to basically sort of talk myself into why this could be good. And I went as far as kind of bringing him here, and he's like, and he didn't agree with the real estate. I was like, well, this thing and this thing, and he's like, listen, and he said exactly that. He's like, you want to pick? He's like, you were trying to launch this brand in this city, if it doesn't do well, did San Francisco not like Souvla, or did you just pick, a C-, location just because it was super cheap?
Right.
You know, and obviously the first restaurant was heavily bootstrapped, and we had to, we didn't, it was a very small capital raise. And so, everything had to be kind of value engineered. And so again, I'm happy that I didn't take that space, and that I waited for this other space that was literally 2.5 times more expensive.
Sure, yeah.
But I mean, couldn't have asked for a better piece of real estate. So,
and see what it's grown into now.
And here we are, 5 years later. Yeah.
Charles, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
There you have it. That's my conversation with Charles Bililies, the CEO and founder of Souvla. As always, go to QSRmagazine.com for all the news and insights you need on the QSR and fast casual restaurant industries. Please go subscribe to this podcast as well on whatever services you're listening on. Please also send us feedback. You can email that to me at sam@QSRmagazine.com. You can also go to QSRmagazine.com/podcast to get the full archive of Fast Forward. Thanks again for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.